You saw it first on the long-range scanner. A flicker of wrongness in the void. It was a ship, of that you were certain. Its signature was crude, almost offensively simple. Yet it drifted in a high-value salvage corridor. Your ship, the Void Talon, was a scavenger. And this was the scent of opportunity. You altered course immediately. The ship grew on your main view screen. It was an ugly thing. All hard angles and bulky modules. It was clearly of human design. You knew their work. They built ships like they built their history, brutally effective. This one, however, was silent. No energy readings, no communications, no signs of life. It was a ghost ship, a prize of immense value. Your mandibles clicked in satisfaction. A human destroyer-class vessel was a rare find. Its technology was basic but robust. Your clan would pay handsomely for the raw materials alone. The thought of the prestige made your primary heart beat faster. You were going to be a very wealthy captain. You brought the Void Talon alongside the dead ship. Its name was painted on the hull in bold, arrogant letters. The UNS Invictus. You had no idea what an Invictus was, but you guessed it was some human word for free salvage. You ordered the boarding party to prepare. The silence from the vessel was complete, a perfect invitation. You stepped through the forced airlock. The air inside was stale, cold. Emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows. Your armored feet echoed in the corridor. You felt a strange sense of reverence. It was like stepping into a tomb. A very profitable tomb, you reminded yourself. Your team swept through the forward decks. The bridge was empty. The crew quarters were vacant. Not a single body was found. This was unusual. Typically, a ghost ship held grim evidence of its fate. A firefight, a plague, a systems failure. This vessel was just empty, as if the crew had simply vanished. You pressed deeper into the ship's core. Your scanners led you to the main cargo bay. The doors were sealed tight. It took your engineers several minutes to slice them open. The thick metal groaned in protest. Then it hissed open. What you saw inside stopped you cold. It was not cargo. It was a crypt. Hundreds of glass coffins lined the massive chamber. They were arranged in perfect, silent rows. Inside each one lay a human. They were dressed in pristine uniforms. Their hands were folded on their chests. Their faces were calm, as if sleeping. But they were not sleeping. Your bioscanners confirmed it. They were all dead. This was not a cargo bay. It was a hall of the dead. You had never seen anything like it. Why would a species preserve its fallen this way? What purpose did these glass crypts serve? A cold feeling began to crawl up your spine. This was not the simple prize you had imagined. This was something else entirely. Something deeply, profoundly alien. Your people had no such customs. When a warrior falls, their body is left behind. It is an empty shell. Its purpose is over. To carry it around was illogical. It was a waste of resources, a dangerous sentimentality. You looked at the rows of silent, preserved humans. Your logical mind raced. It searched for an explanation. It found only one. These bodies were not being honored. They were being stored. A horrifying thought took root in your mind. What if these were not just dead soldiers? What if they were a reserve army? A legion of the fallen, waiting for a signal to rise and fight again. The idea was absurd. It violated every known law of biology. Yet, the evidence was right in front of you. You pictured it. A human fleet is damaged in battle. It retreats. It reanimates its dead. It returns to the fight with fresh soldiers. An army that never truly shrinks. a species that cannot be defeated by attrition. The strategic implications were staggering. Suddenly, the crude human ship seemed far more advanced than your own. You continued your exploration of the UNS Invictus. You needed more information, more proof of this insane theory. You left the hall of glass crypts behind. You moved toward what your sensors identified as a ceremonial chamber. It was located near the ship's command center. The doors slid open silently. The room was dark. A single light illuminated a wall of polished black stone. It gleamed in the dimness. As you drew closer, you saw it was covered in writing. Thousands upon thousands of names. They were etched into the stone in neat, precise columns. The list was immense. It covered the entire wall from floor to ceiling. You scanned the names. They were human, of course. Each one was followed by a rank and a series of numbers. You did not understand the script, but you understood the scale. This was not a memorial. Your mind, now primed for horror, saw it for what it must be. It was a roster, a list of all the soldiers stored in their deathless legions. The number of names was terrifying, far more than could fit on this single ship. This meant there were other ships like this one, flutes of them, perhaps entire planets dedicated to storing the dead. You felt a wave of cold dread wash over you. You had stumbled upon humanity's darkest secret. They were not just a young, aggressive species. They were a death cult, an empire of the undying. You retreated from the ship immediately. You left the glass coffins and the wall of names behind. You returned to the Void Talon with a chilling new purpose. You were no longer a scavenger. You were a messenger. The galaxy had to be warned. You compiled your report with trembling appendages. Every detail was crucial. You described the silent ghost ship, the strange, empty corridors. You detailed the crypts of glass, the rows of perfectly preserved bodies. You included high-resolution images of the wall of names, the endless roster of fallen soldiers. You sent the report to your high command. You knew it would change everything. The response was faster than you anticipated. It was a storm of encrypted communications. Your leaders were stunned. Then, they were terrified. The concept of a reserve army of the dead was beyond their comprehension. It was a strategic nightmare. They convened an emergency session of the War Council. Your report was the only topic. Panic spread through the Cathar Empire like a plague. Your species was known for its stoic warriors, its unshakable resolve. But your report shattered their confidence. They saw humanity not as a rival, but as an existential threat, a monster that had cheated the fundamental laws of the universe. The Elder Ones, the supreme leaders of your people, demanded more proof. They could not risk a galactic war on one report alone. They needed to be certain. They needed to see it for themselves. So they sent their best stealth ships, their most elite scouts. Their destination was a human colony world, a small, unassuming planet in the Alpha Centauri system. Their mission was simple. Observe the humans. Find more evidence of their death-defying power. Confirm the terrible truth you had uncovered. The scouts arrived. They cloaked their ships in orbit. They watched the planet below with powerful sensors. They scanned cities and military bases. Then, they found it. On the outskirts of a major settlement, a vast, open field. It was dotted with thousands of small, white markers. They were arranged in neat, orderly rows, just like the crypts on the Invictus. The scouts zoomed in. They saw humans moving through the field. They walked slowly. They placed flowers on the ground. They stood silently before the white markers. Your scouts analyzed the biosigns. The humans were sad, but the ground beneath them, it was pulsing with dormant energy. Thousands of distinct, lifeless signatures, each one matching a human biological profile. They were not visiting graves. They were tending to their sleeping soldiers. This was not a field of sorrow. It was a garrison, a terrifyingly vast, open-air barracks for the dead. The scouts saw the humans' solemn behavior as a ritual, a way to maintain the connection to their dormant army, to ensure they were ready when called. They even joked it was the neatest military camp they had ever seen. The report they sent back confirmed your worst fears. It was all true. Humanity was stockpiling its dead. Your leaders were now convinced. They ordered a deeper study of human culture. They needed to understand the source of this power. Your scholars and spies began to pore over captured human data. They studied their history, their art, their religion. They found images of great monuments, towering statues of human figures. There was one called Lincoln, a grim-faced man seated on a massive throne. Another called Washington, a warrior on a powerful steed. There were countless others, statues of soldiers from 100 different wars. Your people had no tradition of building statues to individuals. It was seen as inefficient, vain. Your analysts came to a chilling conclusion. These were not monuments to heroes. They were idols, representations of the powerful beings that granted humanity their unnatural abilities. These were the human war gods, the death gods, the beings who allowed them to raise their fallen. Each statue was a temple, a focus point for their dark power. You looked at the images of these stone giants and felt a deep, primal fear. What kind of gods would demand such a price? The next discovery was even more disturbing. Your spies finally managed to break the encryption on human data networks. They dove into the vast ocean of their planetary communications. They expected to find military secrets, invasion plans. What they found was stranger. They found whispers, whispers from the dead. They found digital archives, records of deceased individuals, personal histories, photographs, even voice recordings. But it was more than just a record. They found active communities, humans interacting with these profiles, asking for advice, citing the words of the dead in arguments, using the stories of their ancestors to guide their decisions. Your spies did not see this as memory or history. They saw it as a literal communion. The dead were not truly gone. They lived on as digital ghosts. They continued to influence the living, to offer guidance, to command their descendants from beyond the grave. The human network was not just for communication. It was a seance, a digital pipeline to their deathless legions. The ancestors were not memories. They were active commanders. The evidence was overwhelming. Your leaders took their findings to the Galactic Council. They stood before the assembled representatives of 100 species. They presented the case against humanity. They showed the images of the ghost ship, the glass crypts, the fields of sleeping soldiers, the idols of their war gods. They played the captured whispers of the digital ancestors. They painted a picture of a monstrous death cult, a species that had made a pact with dark forces, a species that did not respect the sanctity of life or death. They argued that humanity was an abomination, a growing threat that would one day turn its deathless legions on the rest of the galaxy. They called for a purge, a final, decisive action to cleanse the stars of this plague. The council was horrified. The evidence was compelling. The logic, from their perspective, was sound. Species after species voted in favor of the resolution. The Cathar, your people, were granted leadership of the crusade. A galactic proclamation was issued. Humanity was declared an enemy of all life. They were to be contained, eradicated, their unnatural power broken forever. You stood on the bridge of your new command ship, the Retribution. It was the flagship of the largest armada the galaxy had ever seen. Thousands of warships from a dozen different species, all united in a single, terrible purpose. Your fleet blotted out the stars. It moved as one towards a single point of light. The yellow star the humans called a soul. Your destination was Earth, the human homeworld, the heart of their death cult. You felt a grim sense of destiny. You were the one who had uncovered their secret. Now you would be the one to end it. Your strategists had prepared for every possibility. They expected to fight not only the living human fleet, they expected to fight the dead as well. Your war planners imagined reanimated soldiers pouring from city-sized crypts. They imagined ghost ships materializing from the void. Every ship in your armada was equipped with special energy weapons, designed to disrupt biological matter, to ensure that what was dead stayed dead. You steeled yourself for the battle to come, a holy war against the forces of undeath itself. You thought, perhaps they'll just surrender. It would be easier for everyone. A foolish, hopeful thought. The armada translated from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. A wave of steel and fire, 1,000,000 miles wide. The human response was confusing. Their defense fleet moved to intercept, as expected. But their communications were not filled with defiance. They were filled with questions. Unidentified armada, you have violated sovereign space. State your intentions. This is a declaration of war. By what right do you attack us? They seemed genuinely baffled, as if they had no idea why you were there. You dismissed it as a trick, a clever deception to make you lower your guard. You gave the order to attack. The first wave of your fleet surged forward, weapons blazing. The humans, their questions unanswered, met you with a ferocity that surprised you. Their ships were less advanced, smaller, but they flew them with a desperate, reckless courage. They fought with a kind of focused rage. It was not the cold, remorseless efficiency you expected from a death cult. It was hot-blooded, passionate. They were fighting to defend their homes. You found their bravery almost admirable. It was a shame they had to be purged. Your strategists had identified what they believed was a key target. A massive installation on the human moon, Luna. Scans showed it contained millions of those dormant life signatures, buried in neat, orderly patterns. It was surrounded by monuments and temples. It was clearly their most important asset, a primary reanimation center, or perhaps the tomb of their greatest death god. You ordered a portion of the fleet to break off. Their target was Luna. They were to strike the sacred ground with overwhelming force, pulverize it, destroy the dormant legions before they could be awakened. You watched on the main view screen as your warships moved into position. A storm of plasma and kinetic munitions rained down on the lunar surface. The first explosions blossomed in silence. Craters of fire and dust erupted across the serene gray landscape. You struck what your maps called the Sea of Tranquility. You hit their sacred ground, the place you believed held their power. You waited for the counterattack, for the legions of the dead to rise from their shattered tombs. But nothing happened. The ground remained still. The dead did not rise. Something else did. A wave of pure, unadulterated rage from the living. The human fleet's tactics changed instantly. Their disciplined formations broke. They charged your lines like enraged beasts. Their communications, once filled with confused questions, were now a torrent of raw fury. They were no longer fighting a battle. They were exacting vengeance. The human ships, which you had once dismissed as crude, became terrifying. They dodged and weaved through your organized fleet. They flew with a suicidal abandon that tore your formations apart. A small human fighter, damaged and burning, would not retreat. It would turn and ram itself into the bridge of one of your cruisers. They fought with no regard for their own lives. They fought for something you had just desecrated. The intensity of their response was illogical. You had destroyed a military asset, a stockpile of dormant soldiers. In your culture, this would be a calculated loss. For the humans, it was something else. You had not just attacked them, you had violated them. The ferocity of their counterattack was pushing your fleet back. Your superior numbers meant nothing against their righteous anger. You needed to understand. What had you done? In the chaos of the battle, your communication officers intercepted a stray signal. It was a civilian broadcast from Earth. Weak, but clear. They patched it through to your private view screen. The image was of a gathering of humans. They were dressed in black. They stood in a quiet room, looking at a single wooden box. An image of a young human female in a military uniform was projected behind them. An older male human stood at a podium. He was speaking. His voice was thick with an emotion you could not initially identify. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was grief. He spoke of the young female, his daughter, a pilot killed in your initial, unprovoked attack. He spoke of her courage, her laughter, the memories she left behind. He was not giving a military briefing. He was giving a eulogy. You listened, transfixed. You heard words like love, honor, remembrance. You saw other humans in the room crying. Tears streamed down their faces. You accessed the translation matrix. The word cemetery, the place you had just bombed, did not mean dormant barracks. It meant final resting place. The wall of names on the ghost ship was not a roster. It was a memorial. To honor the fallen, not to reuse them. The truth crashed down upon you with the force of a supernova. A cold, sickening realization that hollowed you out completely. You had made a terrible, universe-shattering mistake. The dead were not an army. They were a memory. The glass crypts were not storage. They were a sign of respect for those lost far from home. The statues were not idols to death gods. They were tributes to inspire the living. The digital whispers were not commands. They were the echoes of lives lived. Humanity did not conquer death. They cherished life. They cherished it so fiercely that they refused to let the memory of their loved ones fade. They carried their dead not as a weapon, but as a burden of love. A reason to continue fighting. A reason to build a better future. You had not attacked a death cult. You had attacked a species that loved so deeply, it defied the void itself. You looked away from the funeral. You looked back at the main battle display. You saw the human ships, burning and broken, still charging your lines. You saw their rage. And you finally understood it. You had not just killed their soldiers. You had desecrated their graves. You had spit on their memories. You had violated the one thing they held truly sacred. A new fear took hold of you. A fear far deeper than any dread of a reanimated corpse. You had spent months, years, fearing an army of the dead. You had convinced the galaxy to fear them with you. But you were wrong. The dead were gone. They were at peace. It was the living you should have feared. The ones who fight to honor that peace. The ones who carry the names of their fallen into battle not as a roster, but as a promise. You looked at the fury of the human fleet, a righteous fire in the dark. And you knew, with absolute certainty, that you had just awakened true gods of war.